Today, there is the special pleasure that we're sitting here with two sources of two organizations. So to state that openly, um, before we dive in on that, maybe just coming back to the original topic, there is something like creativity, power, and hierarchies in the title, and we done not just heard a lot about source, but maybe before, just to connect that to not like the abstract principle first, but to like the lived experience. Do you have any story or anything that comes to your mind when hearing creativity, power, and hierarchies? Because this is like more the day-to-day things that we're confronted with, and how do we deal with that? Because that's the what we in the end try to live with and embrace and change.
Okay, I was gonna let you go first, Jannik, but sure. Yeah, thanks, Johannes, for that introduction. Also, it's interesting to hear it like so nicely summarized, the source principles. Yeah, I guess one thing that comes to mind quite strongly is that I think when we look at these themes of hierarchy, creativity, power, etc., that if I think about the space of design and also art, actually, I find that it's very natural, or people understand, even in very participatory, self-organized groups, they understand by now, most of the time, oh, we're not gonna all try to make a logo together or decide on the brand identity. But there's sort of a sense that there's maybe one person who's like the artist in this case that's going to have a creative vision of what it should look like, and that people can give feedback, they can give ideas and input, but there's one person that needs to sort of hold the integrity of that to have a really good outcome. And that for some reason, applying that to other areas, especially developing initiatives and organizations, that seems a lot harder to accept there, especially when it comes to groups that are trying to be more participatory or self-organized. So I find that interesting, or that's a tension that I've noticed when this topic comes up. What do you think, Jannik?
Um, well, I can relate to what you shared. Sometimes I wonder where's the art, where's the creativity in the seemingly mundane activities. So I think that's a whole conversation for itself. And actually, the one example that came up for me is thinking back of my own how to say, like being a primary student, or actually a student being in primary school. I was thinking about that actually quite a bit, because there is certain power and there's hierarchy in the classroom, which I think is relatively obvious. However, I was at a Montessori school, which works with different principles. So basically, every day I felt like I'm the source of my learning journey. Maybe I didn't feel exactly that way or in those words, but I think I could literally feel it in my body that I am shaping my own learning journey. And I decide where I want to go and what I want to do. And that really sparked quite some creativity, a field where I could unfold myself, which was only possible because others, like the teachers, were creating and holding that space. And that's something I think that really deeply shaped me.
So from what you're just saying, I'm reminded of what we had in the check-in. The main two words were agency and tension. So being able to take action and to drive something towards what I'm envisioning, and tension of where is the creativity? Where are we respecting certain um, ideas? I would keep it that general. And I already claimed or said that you are the source of the organizations. So is this a title that you're coming in with, like in the founding process, or is this something that you're attributed with or that you realize? So, or is this just Johannes inviting this workshop and claiming you to be the source? So when did you realize or started working with that concept, and also uh, maybe claiming it for yourself? I'm the source of.
I can pick it up. Yeah, so I think it's a really great question. And when I started Greater Than, this was around 2017, I had not heard yet about the source principles. So like I wasn't familiar with it. And it was only, I think, maybe a year or two later that I really sort of got more familiar with it. So in that regard, like I didn't have the language or the understanding of that kind of idea coming into it. And so I think there was quite little awareness of what it actually means to start something. Like what is that act? What are you actually doing? And also the responsibility that comes with that. And I think that in my case also, in a way, the origin of Greater Than came from me in a way out of a bit of a reaction of difficult previous experiences in another distributed community called WeShare, and sort of wanting to do things differently and build on the learning and the pain, but like there was a very strong reactiveness in it. And so it took me very, very long to actually realize myself that that is what I was doing. And there was actually quite a lot of different configurations of people that I was working with, especially at the beginning, that shifted quite a lot. So 18 months later, things, already look completely different. And I think at that point, I started realizing, what role I was in. And I think that when I first learned about the source principles, I actually had quite a lot of feeling of guilt because I thought back to other things I'd been involved in and was like, oh, shoot, like I didn't pass that on very well. Like, of course it didn't go anywhere. Or, it definitely brought up a lot of feelings of sort of, just not being aware. And so I would say that's the first step of realizing like, oh, I think I'm the source of this thing that, has been a very, very slow process overall. And like, took a few years, I would say. And maybe I'll leave the rest to the next question for now and hear from Jannik.
Well, yeah, I can resonate quite a bit. I mean, also when we started, I didn't know about source and in general did not think so much about structures, hierarchies, except that wanting to do things radically differently. And I think that was the ambition of Unity Effect from the very beginning, saying like we are self-organized. And I read, or I came from, for example, complexity science, Frederic Laloux, reinventing organization. So this was a bit the paradigm that I came from, like wanting to create an organization that is truly self-organized. And over the years, realizing that this needs careful attention. So it just does not happen by itself, or then you're coming together as a group of people, which in our case stayed really stable over the years. But I think what then actually happened was that just wanting to be self-organized did not lead to Unity Effect being a healthy organization internally, because there were lots of pathologies, I would call it now, looking back. And so things we actually really needed to look at and work through. And I think in that process, there was almost no shying back or just really thinking about what could be other ways to actually acknowledge certain roles that we have. And so in that process, I also took a course at Greater Than. I had, I think, 2 sessions with Peter Koenig. So just intuitively felt that this is something that might actually benefit us and reconcile our ambition, wanting to be self-organized, with the need some ordering principle that honors the creativity and the spark that is within each one of us. And I think in that, it was founded the company 2019, but I think it was just until 2021, 2022 that we actually jointly looked at it. And just adding this as a last point here, it was very difficult also for me to acknowledge that role. It still, in a way, is sometimes. I'm hesitant. And it needed other people to actually speak it out loud and say it to me. I was not able to actually step in and say, I am the source of Unity Effect.
How is this for you, Francesca?
For me, well, it resonates a lot. And I guess, maybe we're a bit similar in that, I also have had a very big discomfort with that, with acknowledging myself as source, especially to others. And I would say that is a full-on work in progress right now. Because I would say like until this day that has not actually fully happened. And that's really quite yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel good to realize that that is the case, especially given that we support other people to do that. And somehow it's always easier to help others than yourself, right? The website development business that has a horrible website, I think, you know, that's probably part of the part of the game. But yeah, I think somehow that step from like realizing you're the source to then really acknowledging it and like acknowledging it to yourself, but then also to others, I think yeah, for me it's been a really deep personal journey, really, in terms of confronting a lot of blocks and personal shadows of things that are basically telling me that that's not what I should be doing. And I definitely would want to emphasize that getting support with that can be very, very helpful. And I've been working with a coach that specifically also focuses on supporting sources. And that's really made a huge difference. And yeah, it's something that I think generally I would always recommend to get help with, because you just can't see your own blind spots. That's sort of the definition. So someone else has to help you get there.
And what for me then is helpful with that source picture is that talking about that creative field that is happening or mainly happening from the source. So as Francesca, you said, your own stories will show up in that field, and then you're realizing, ooh, oops, who did this? And then I know this from being a source in other contexts, like, and then seeing, oh, okay, how do we work with that? And then for me, it's an invitation to look back on myself and to start from there. And I have a question right now in the chat. I think that works, that fits in here quite well. Asking, how can it be an organic process or not a source-owned process? Or turning it around and mixing it, is a source-owned process a organic process? Or maybe just some thoughts. So what does it mean for you acknowledging that own role of being a source connected to that process? What does that bring, change, do?
What do we mean? Which process do we mean right now?
I think the whole process of starting a collaborative organization. You're realizing you're starting something, maybe you're on the way, you're realizing, oh, I'm one of the sources, or there is a source. We haven't talked about it that freely. And I understand that question in the sense of like, what's organic? Is there organic way of just naturally forming, I guess, or is, so what's your connection to that? Or is the source contributing to that? I'm just taking that question as it is to our conversation.
Yeah, I find that super interesting because to me, so one thing I wanted to actually mention about the acknowledgement of source is that even though it's been super hard for me to acknowledge myself as source, it's been so easy and so relieving and helpful for me to acknowledge other sources that I'm working with in my field that are doing different parts. And to me, it makes everything so much more organic. Like that's been really, really liberating because somehow, I don't know, it just helps you understand, oh, what is my posture right now towards this person? Am I trying to help them get clear on what to do with their initiative? Am I trying to help them? And that it's not like my opinion against your opinion, because it's somehow clear that they have an authority to just like make that final choice. And so, yeah, to me, I definitely don't necessarily feel like you always have to name source explicitly, that there are people with which you can organically work in that way. And that, you know, there's thousands of projects out there that don't name it. And I think that's also what Peter Koenig found, right? He looked at all these companies that were working well and they were organically doing it. But I think maybe there's just other types of contexts where it is helpful or where things are getting stuck because there's some kind of power struggles or other things happening. And then that's where I think to get back into that flow, you might need to look at that and actually make it explicit. But I wonder what Jannik's experience is with that.
So I think it really depends also on the cycle or the phase of the initiative organization. I think in our case, it was just really required to also make it explicit and to mention it, and also to say that this is now the principle that we use to actually figure out our internal, let's call it hierarchy. So, and I think doing that. And then also in our case, we worked with an external coach who then learned about the source principle in order to actually help us figuring things out. And I think then at some point it became a much more organic flow. I also remember, I'm not sure if this is related to the question, but earlier this year internally, Johannes, you've been there in the team at some point, we were thinking about the organic RAM and roles and this and that. And that's one thing, but then we actually looked or asked, what do we actually feel drawn to? Where do we feel spark or source energy flowing towards? And I think that was moving us into a much more organic internal process in terms of clarifying roles. Understanding, here I'm just taking something up. Maybe the person currently is not in the organization, but coming back at some point. And here I'm actually stepping in, I'm taking over, so to speak. I am willing to take up the responsibility for the creative field. And that was just very helpful and very, in that sense, like explicitly work with it. But I would say, like, as Francesca said, there are probably many names with it, many ways how this can be introduced. But I just recognize every time that once this is something that we actually live, things become much more organic.
Yeah, and I think just because I see this comment here, this question about the creative field mapping, like I find that so useful because often we've had situations where like we sit down and like we have people draw out like, what do you see? Like where's the field and who's in it and who's holding different parts? And especially, I think, in the kind of endeavors that a lot of us are in, where there's like a lot of people that are super entrepreneurial, you end up with a lot of source type people that are like starting all kinds of stuff. So like you have a lot of things and they can get quite confusing. I think there's a really big risk of that. And that just, have some really big aha moments of realizing, like, oh my God, people have completely different visualizations of what this is and where they're doing it. And I think it really it helps identify areas of misalignment or ways to bring things into flow. So I could really recommend that as a great exercise that can sometimes be quite revealing and shocking.
We're now already towards the end of the conversation, and now it's good to really talk about practicalities. So for you both, you said you're partially like in the process of acknowledging or also being more acknowledged in that role of source in the organization. But maybe how do you live that sourcing? I like the verb a lot for that. How do you live your sourcing for yourself, and maybe how do you live it in your organization? And also there was this question in the chat of how can being a source be regenerative, not burning out, not taking responsibility for everything, not doing. So maybe that connects, maybe not, but I would be really interested in like your practical ways of sourcing.
Well, starting as I'm struggling with my headphones, but anyway, I hope you can hear me well. So one example I already mentioned, just really regularly internally, just tune in. There's this general visual that we are developing, shaping of what the organization is and the different parts, how they connect and how we personally connect to each to those. And this is what we use to assign roles and responsibilities and so on. Personally, the question also that came on regeneration and the responsibility part is something that I definitely struggled with. So it's really this, I think for me to understand that being responsible for the creative field is the opposite of being responsible for all the details that happen in the field. And this is something that I still really have to learn and to embody. So what is actually then my role in terms of being present with? Because if I zoom in too much, then it feels like I'm somehow getting lost in some of the details and I'm, not having the energy to actually be present with the whole. So one thing that supports us internally is regular source check-ins that we have on different levels. So also supporting me. So in this case, Johannes really supporting me regularly to get clear, encouraging me to take walks, not only sit in front of the laptop. And me as much as I can, also encouraging and supporting the others in the team, like really, tuning in, where's your energy currently flowing? How does this show up? for you right now, and how can we make more space for that, the creativity, basically. So those are things we do at the moment.
That's really inspiring to hear how you apply that. Would love to try that as well. I would say in Greater Than, we are not that far when it comes to the internal part. But interestingly, it has come quite a lot into the client work. So, right, we support organizations that want to, develop new ways of working that can be quite broad. But one thing that's been quite interesting is that both being aware and asking the question when a new client project pops up of like, who's the source of that in the Greater Than side, right? So I think there's somehow more awareness, or I don't know, that's flowing more in terms of working then actively with that. And then the other element, which I think is actually really important, especially if you're working in a field where you're trying to do capacity building and you're trying to not make your client dependent on you, but basically allow them to then take things forward and develop them. And I think that especially the way we work, when you're quite embedded, you start initiating things sometimes, right? And it's really interesting to be super careful of like, wait a minute, do we want to be the ones initiating? Shouldn't someone in the actual organization we're supporting, they should be taking the risk to do it, to make sure that they can keep doing it when we're gone, right? Or if we do initiate, that we actually make sure we do a succession to somebody there. And to me, like for myself personally, like it's super important that we do that, because otherwise I feel like, well, we can't really be in integrity saying we're doing capacity building and making ourselves obsolete if we're sort of starting all these great things for them and then leaving and not actually making sure that like the source is now with them.
Wow, it sparks so much ideas in me already listening, and I see that the chat is already like so long messages with gems of talking about artistic ideas, but also asking of can we narrow it down and like apply it to maybe more people that are not somebody called it spiritual in the chat. I think source in general is not, you can put it in your way of thinking that can be spiritual, but in the basic way of it's like supporting each other's creativity, and that's maybe mainly human in my opinion. So Francesca, Jannik, any closing things we have to say? Because I think we can go on for quite a long time, and the next step would be breakout groups that we can start to digest, speak, and then we also have harvesting time. So this is not the last thing, but anything that needs to be said right now?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So it just came back when you shared, Francesca, about working with clients, and it just very much resonates. And I just, like from the different projects I have, the one that gives me the most excitement is where I have the lowest involvement, because I feel the other side just really takes charge. They are the source of reshaping certain parts, and I'm just there, for them supporting, gaining the clarity. And then it came, so one thought came up. So what helps me to also reconcile source and for myself, and also to embrace that role, is to be aware that everybody is the source of their own life. And this is nothing I could ever take away, rather the opposite. By stepping in and creating a certain creative field, I actually support others and other teams and so on to actually step into their creative power more. So in that sense, me acknowledging that role, I am of service to other people. In that sense, stepping more into that. And I think this is something that also eases or takes away some of the edges, at least for me. It's about the concept.
Yeah, and I guess I just wanted to maybe add a provocation, which is that I saw this question about it seeming a bit spiritual and how to be more evidence-based. And I guess, to be honest, the more I look at it, I think there is a spiritual dimension to it, absolutely. But that it has to do with like the connection to life force that is nature, which is around us. And that I think is really interesting to think about, like, what is the resistance to bringing that more into business as well, or work? Because I think yeah, that there's a lot maybe to be learned from that. And I think it's maybe an interesting edge to push oneself into if that feels quite uncomfortable, I guess. Why does it feel uncomfortable?